Like I said, this is the Kitsap Sons Editorial Board, and we're talking to Irene Bowling, who's a candidate for the 35th District Senate seat. And what we're going to do for you is give you 2 minutes to kind of introduce yourself and anything else about you, and then we'll go into some Q&A. So
Great, thank you. Well, I have my little cheat sheets here with some facts and figures here. I am from this area. My family moved here in the 1930s from Kansas during the Great Depression. My grandparents, and I have family members that were loggers, and my parents met at PSNS at the shipyard. My dad's a World War II vet, and I've had many cousins, and we have a very extended family here in the area that have been in the Navy, Air Force. One broke away and went into the Air Force. But we have, mainly federal workers in our family. And so from a young age, I was brought up with this kind of moral obligation and thought that service to your country is of paramount importance. That if you're going to reap the benefits of the country that you live in, then you need to be involved in it, whether it's always voting and being aware of what's happening politically in your community, and of course statewide and nationally, but also defending your country, which I've seen as an example through my own family, and the sacrifices that it's also taken on some of the friends and family that I know. I am married to the same man for 35 years. His name is William Pontius, and I have 3 children, Andrew, Michael, and May. Andrew's 22, Michael's 18. He just graduated from CK High School, and May's 15. She's going to be going to CK High School next year. The interesting thing about me, I suppose, in relation or in contrast to some of my relatives, is that I went into a professional musical career. I showed a musical talent as a young age, and so I earned my way and worked my way through school, bachelor's, master's, and doctorate in piano performance. The last degree that I received was from the University of Washington several years ago. So I've been here a long time and had a very successful business here.
okay. Well, let's that was one of the questions I wanted to ask you, actually. That you come into this as a small business owner. One of the things that we often hear in the legislative campaigns is we have to have a state that has a good climate for small businesses. So tell us about specifically what your experience has been like, and then how that influences kind of your philosophy as a legislator. What, in your opinion, from doing what you do, what do you think the state does best to help encourage small business as having that part of our economy?
Well, that's actually one of the reasons I'm running, because I'm not happy with what the state is doing in encouraging small business. I think the B&O tax is too much. Several years ago, by the way, my business called Bowling Music Studios Incorporated, and I also started another business in Seattle called Seattle Sound Effects, which was a mobile classroom that went around to parks and recreation and retirement homes and that kind of thing. People that couldn't afford a piano lab or piano lessons. So getting back to your original question, I have several people on my staff, and I hired a few extra ones about 4 years ago. And because of the taxation and because we were reaching a certain amount of money, it put us into a different category. I actually had to let them go because it was so much extra work with so little return. So my issue about all of this is that small business people get hit both ways, and we're also supporting a huge revenue base for the state. But I think that the big corporations and some of the big businesses should be paying more of their fair share, and it shouldn't be on the backs of the small business people or on the working class. I think there's a real inequality that's developed in the last few years, and I'm very concerned about it. So that's one of the main reasons, actually, that I am running for office. My oldest son, is very interested in going to his own private business, in the restaurant business, and he's brewing beer and doing all kinds of interesting things. He's an excellent cook. And when we look at the tax code and we've gone over all the economics with it, it's like frightening, So we want to encourage people to have small businesses. We want to encourage them to develop their businesses because it gives jobs to people. It is very satisfying to be your own boss, even though it's a lot of work, because your job's never done. It's not like you're just checking in and checking out. But it's a real problem, I think, in our state.
We talk about some of the things that big business should pay their fair share or inequality. What exactly do you mean? There's all sorts of different things. Are you talking about when we incentivize Boeing to stay here? Are there other things that you would kind of target and say we need to be talking about this?
Yeah, I mean, I can be really very specific. I've done a lot of research on this because the issue, I hear all the people that are running for office saying we don't have enough money, we don't have enough revenue to pay for our education, we don't have enough money to pay for our transportation issues for the state, et cetera, et cetera. But no one is really addressing how do we get more revenue. Now, people don't want a huge increase in their taxes. That's obviously a very unpopular idea. We don't want a lot more on our gas tax. But actually what's happened over the years, we've been giving more and more loopholes and incentives to big business. So this is why I don't think that they're paying their fair share. And I'll give you, I wrote down a few examples of this, actually. There have been 646 different tax loopholes identified by the state. Some of them may be positive for our state and should be kept, but there are a lot that have been in existence for a long time and have no fiscal advantage to us and should be closed. Okay, I can give you some specific examples. The preferential tax rate for resellers of prescription drugs that benefit out-of-state drug companies. It's not even benefiting anyone here in the state. Changing the current non-resident sales tax exemption to a refund program would be an idea. Closing the sales tax loophole for bottled water. An extracted fuel tax loophole that exists that benefits just 5 oil refineries in the state. I mean, those are just 4 little examples, and there are 646 that should be investigated. That could generate millions of dollars into the coffers of Washington State, but every time this comes up, and the House of Representatives has made many attempts to do this, it's shot down by the Senate, the present Senate that we have, which is controlled by the Majority Coalition Caucus, and with the one lone Democrat in it, who is my opponent, Tim Sheldon. So I don't think that's to the best advantage to the state or to all the different things that we really need to get done, and that is something that I would definitely investigate very thoroughly.
Are you taking campaign donations from any industry groups or businesses?
Private, you can look at my PDC file. Of course, it's open to everybody. I mean, I have basically hundreds of people, private people, you know, sometimes checks of $25, $500. I mean, I think I have maybe 3 checks that were $950 from private individuals. Because I'm really a champion of the working class, a lot of the unions have been very interested because they want a transportation package passed. They want their workers that are working on the roads and the railways and the ferries, you know, to be supported. The Washington Education Association, all the teachers are very, very up in arms that they haven't had a pay raise in 6 years, and that the inequalities in all the school districts. I mean, basically these levies were for just extra things. Now the schools are depending on them to even buy pencils and books and things at the schools. So there's a real problem here. And so the money that I'm getting from the unions are ones that they're up in arms about the fact that our infrastructure is falling apart, we're not funding transportation, we're not funding education. These are really, really big issues. And of course, they're interested in a candidate who's going to help champion those causes and give working class people jobs.
One of the things, obviously, I'm going to jump somewhere now, but you talk about education. It was on the answers that you submitted on our website. It was talking about underfunded systems and K-12 education, and then you mentioned higher ed as well. I'm going to ask you generally, kind of give us how the legislature starts to come up with the money to achieve what McCleary is set out to do. And then also the second question would be, since you are someone who's getting the WEA's backing, how are you going to work with financial realities, but also some of the WEA's, the things that they're going to be pushing you on too?
Right, of course.
How do you handle those two?
Before I jump to that subject, there was one thing I forgot to mention in the last question. And that is that if you look at the PTC for Tim Sheldon, it's all power companies and oil companies and big concerns like that. Very few individuals or even small business. So I just thought I'd throw that out as a comparison between who's backing us. So funding education, there was $1 billion put in right at the end of the session that basically the House of Representatives insisted on and pushed through. It's not the 3.5 billion that we need. It is going to be a big problem to try to find this money by the 2018 deadline. And if we don't find new revenue sources, I just don't see how it's achieved. It doesn't, there's just so much money in the pot. And if we just use all of our money from the state revenue to go to education, we are going to have to drastically cut pretty much every other program in the state, which I think is very sad, because if we're looking just purely at the subject of education, a lot of these schools, a lot of these students, a lot of our communities depend on other programs, not just teachers and the kids going to school. They depend on a lot of social services. A lot of children are homeless. For instance, one of the largest group of homeless teenagers in the whole state is in Shelton, in the Shelton School District. Where are these kids going to live? What kind of health care are they going to get? What kind of services will they get? Having schools and having teachers in schools and just having the kids show up to the schools, that's not the whole story here. So I am very concerned about funding McCleary, and the Republican stance on this is that's going to come first and the chips just fall where they may. Well, I think that's a very irresponsible viewpoint, and I don't agree with it. So I think the real issue here is finding revenue, going after corporations. Why did we give Boeing such a great break and then they ship the jobs out of state? If we're going to give tax incentives and tax breaks to companies, then they have to promise our citizens here in this state, we just can't just, like my dog, he rolls over and he's got a little feet up in there. We can't do that. We have to protect ourselves and protect our jobs here.
You've mentioned new revenue a couple of times now. You want to be a little more specific? Do you mean?
I mean, like closing the taps.
Obviously, you mean that. You've made that very clear. Looking at that
right.
first.
For transportation, 0.5 cents a gallon increase, put a tax.
On gas taxes.
Again, who does that hurt? It hurts the poor. It hurts the people that have to drive, like from Mason County, an average an hour to work. So it's a regressive tax policy.
Do you think we should be revisiting some of these tax policies, whether it's, income tax is obviously the big one that's always hanging out there. Is that something you'd ever want to talk about?
I think that, first of all, it has to be something that the people can accept and understand. I think tax law and the way the taxes run are very complicated. But I do think we have a regressive tax system here in Washington State. So I think that we should definitely investigate what things we can do, maybe things that we haven't even thought of before. But this has to be, we have to have an adult conversation about it. It's not something that's going to go away. And I think we have to get some of the smartest people we can find in this state to look at this carefully. I think also since 2008, people are so hurt. They say the jobs are going up. Well, a lot of people just aren't applying anymore for jobs. Or they say that, old people getting jobs again, but they're not the same jobs they had 5 or 6 years ago. They're lower paying jobs in many cases. I know some people that are working more than 2 jobs just to pay for their family, to keep up with the bills. And a lot of men and women, husbands and wives, where maybe one could get away with just working, now it's 2 of them. So, there are a lot of issues here that we have to look at very, very carefully. But what the government is for, and what I would be for, and what I would be if I am your next state senator, is I want to protect our citizenry. This comes first. These people are the main reason that anyone should be in political office.
How do you, and maybe let's touch on the other question I was asking earlier. Obviously, there are people, teachers are people too, but that is a powerful block when you have the WEA backing. How do you balance your attitude of, I want to protect the people and the citizens, when the WA does ask for things. You know, they want raises for their teachers. They want some
Sure.
of these things, and they're pushing a lot of the education policy too.
Well, that's their
where do you-
job,
yeah,
right? I
of
mean,
course
any
it is. No, I'm not
organization that make
disagreeing with
collective
that. That's their job.
bargaining
Yeah.
is to look out for the people that are paying their fees and they're voicing their complaints and voicing their hardships, and so of course.
But it
So I
but
think
puts
as a
the state-
legislator.
It puts
you-
the state in that position sometimes.
Well, I think you have to cut through the nonsense. You've got to look at things very practically. And again, look at the numbers, look at the financial aspect. It all comes down to money. How are we going to spend it? How much can we spend for the teacher COLAs? How do we keep our schools afloat? How do we keep tuitions down for college? I have 3 college-age kids, you know, and my husband's retired. We have a fixed income, except for what I'm doing in my business. It's, you know, we're worried about it. We're worried, how are we going to be able to really help our kids get through college here? So there are lots of issues. Mhm.
So what is then the vision for you? You know, I think you've clearly laid out a couple of the things that the state's going to deal with, and where your where your heart is. But when you start to prioritize, you know, in the questionnaire you answered for us, you even admitted tough choices to make is something like that, are really difficult
Right.
to make.
Right.
When you start to hit those, if we're not going to have an education first budget, it's all in the same pool there. What are the things that you either need to look at and say, can we still do this? Can we do it better? How are we going to make those ends meet?
I think that first of all, we have to figure out in our state senate, who are we really working for? Why are we really here? Are we doing it to protect big business? Or are we doing it to really help the people that are coming into our system here? And my opponent, Tim Sheldon, I think, has aligned himself with the big business and the big players. And that's why I'm not happy about it. We need to have legislators in there that are going to help everybody, from the smallest and the weakest to the people that are also our big leaders of our companies. These are important issues, but if we don't look at things with that kind of motive first, then it gets this is why people are disgusted with politics, why they're disgusted with the Democrats, why they're disgusted. They don't feel that people really care about them. And they're not making decisions, at least in the last 2 years since the Majority Coalition Caucus. They are not making decisions or voting for us, the regular guys. Those decisions have not helped us, no matter what Tim Sheldon says. Okay?
Give me an example of where you think that's happening right now.
All right, well, for instance, he says when people are complaining about the Department of Transportation, he blames it on a lady who runs the department. He says that we all need all these reforms, okay? But he also says, yes, we need a Belfair bypass. We need X, Y, and Z for Mason County. He has been on the Transportation Committee for years. None of these things have gotten accomplished, okay? That's one example. Another one, he says fund education. You know, they haven't come up with any viable path for that. I haven't heard anything from the Majority Coalition Caucus as how they're going to pay for that, okay? It was the House that fought tooth and nail to get that $1 billion passed for the bucket for this coming year. Also, he's both a senator and a commissioner. He's double dipping, you know, taxpayers are paying for 2 different jobs, okay? Mason County, what income has come into Mason, what kind of jobs have come into Mason County? He freely admits that we have to keep the gas tax down because people have to drive an hour to work. Where are the jobs in Mason County? He's been a commissioner for a long time.
What would you do about that?
I have a whole list of things I do to bring for economic development. You're darn right. I'll list them right here,
Yeah,
my little paper.
let's transition.
All right, number 1, we have to partner with our counties, cities, and especially our ports to invest in the infrastructure of this area, especially Mason County. A really good example is the SKIA project, the South Kitsap Industrial area there. I am very excited about that area. I took a tour a couple weeks ago. We have everything there. We have tremendous potential. Why is that not being developed? And it's also a way for them to get out of that whole Belfair sewer big mess, okay? If we can get a sewer line up there that can take care of the industrial waste of that, then we can attract big business there. But unless we, it's kind of a catch-22 situation, because unless you also have big business, who's going to pay for having the sewer line brought up?
Yeah, people are really struggling with that.
Yeah,
in a way.
so that needs to be worked on, okay? That's one idea.
They got the capacity, though, that's for sure. Right.
Yeah, yeah. Also, you have a rail spur there. Wouldn't it be fantastic to explore and expand rail service, to a western port to get our goods out there? Our roads, we've got two-lane roads all over Mason County. Wouldn't it be great to have a good road from Mason County into Tacoma, a more direct route? I think we need that Belfair bypass. They've been spending millions of dollars investigating it, talking about it, That's a big waste of money. Why don't we just get it going? Let's pass a transportation package so that would be on there. He's been on the transportation committee for years. Why hasn't that, what good is it having a senator that can't get anything done?
Is a gas tax worth it to get some of that stuff done? Because Mason County's not the only county saying that, of course,
Right.
in rural places.
Right.
I mean, do you think that's
I
something
don't
that's worth it?
think 15 cents or 12 cents, or, I think it's too high. I would go with something much more conservative that doesn't hit people between the eyeballs so fast. And also, a lot of those people have big trucks, or they're moving things from area to area. I think it's going to hurt people having that high of a gas tax. It might be an option. It would not be my first choice.
What's your first choice?
Well, that's a hard one. I think luxury tax was let go. The MVET tax was let go. Iman passed a lot of things years ago that now we're really suffering for now, because the budget was just stripped out. So maybe some of those things could be reinvestigated and put into our revenue pool. We need to bolster and protect our current businesses. For instance, why are we shipping raw materials like lumber out of Mason County and having them processed in China? Why can't we reopen some of our mills and get people back to work? Why are a lot of the fishery products being processed outside our area, I don't understand that. We need to find ways that we can process the goods that the raw materials that we have here in our gorgeous 35th LD, and be able to make some profit off of it and give people jobs. Who's making those decisions, and how can we help as senators? Education. I'll give you a good example about how important education is. Some friends of ours just moved to Issaquah, and they paid a lot of money for this house. It was a fairly ordinary house, a nice house, but they paid a ton of money for this house. The reason they moved there was so their kids could be in the Issaquah school district, because it's so outstanding. So, Bellevue, Mercer Island, Issaquah, that whole area, they've really invested in their schools. And so how are we going to attract high-tech business, especially, over here in this area, if we don't have schools that people are attracted to? So really developing and investing in your schools, getting back to one of your earlier questions about education, If we don't have happy teachers, and we don't have the best teachers, and we don't pay them correctly, we're not going to develop good schools. It just doesn't happen. I used to teach at Olympic College. They kept me 1 hour short of full time most of the time, so I started my own business. People leave educational jobs, especially the ones that can do other things. They leave those educational jobs because they're not paid what they're really worth and what they can get on the outside market. So as far as paying teachers, or trying to appease teachers, well, it's a hard darn job. They're like the Marine Corps of our society. They should be paid. And if we want to develop a really top-notch school district in our area, the 35th LD, we need to pay our teachers.
How do you even out how schools are funded across the state? You were using examples like Bellevue and Issaquah and Mercer Island,
Yeah.
who pay a lot more in local levy money. Like, they contribute higher than the people in Belfair do. It's the state's job to even that out. Do you think the state is not doing an adequate job of that right now?
Yeah, I do not think they are. Absolutely not. I don't think that the quality of a school should depend on how rich the people are that are in that area. Everyone should have a fair shot at getting a good education. I mean, I come from a working class family. I started working when I was 13. I went to college when I was 16. I put myself all the way through a doctoral program. And you know, one of the reasons I did it, it's not just because I'm like such a hard worker, which I am, but it was because tuition was doable. You could actually work and go to school at the same time. How many people can do that anymore? You can't have a part-time job and also pay tuition, you know, at like University of Washington in these schools anymore. It's too expensive. So who's that hurt? That's another, you know, so what good is it to put all your money into K through 12 and you've got these incredible kids and then they stop, they can't go to school after that, they can't go to university? What kind of technical schools are available for them? I went to a fantastic apprentice program, training program in South Seattle for painters, floor layers, glaziers, people that put windows in buildings. It's a multi-million-dollar facility that the unions built and put up. And they train people in the working trades, the housing trade. Of course, that's suffered a lot because of the, you know, there hasn't been a lot of building that's coming up a little bit, but still, incredible facility to train people how to be safe on their job and how to do a really excellent job. People just don't do that. I mean, if anyone looked at my painting job in my house, they'd say, you better go over there to South Seattle and hire some of those kids and redo it. You know, I mean, it's wonderful to have skilled labor. So there are all different kinds of educational opportunities. I mean, PSNS has a wonderful apprentice program. Look how many people have had a fantastic job, career, been able to pay their way, pay for their family.
Sorry about that.
Because of the apprentice program. You know, so that's another, it's not just high ed, it's not just K through 12, but it's like anything that's training people to be productive members of our society, we need to invest in.
You know, you were talking about Tim Sheldon and critical of some of the things he's done. He was also the one Democrat that created that majority coalition. And
He's one of two.
Right.
Rodney Tong was the
Right.
other one. Yeah.
So of course, that's his example of how he works with another party, how he does that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
What about you tells people, I can work with Republicans, I can be bipartisan, I can do this job in a way that we're all kind of pointed in the right direction instead of arguing with one another?
Right. I think that's a valid and very important question because we see too much of this partisanship all over the country and especially in Washington, D.C. One thing I think that's kind of unusual because of the job that I've had all these years is I've taught and been involved in families that are of all different political persuasions. I would say probably the majority Republican. I see what our military families endure and have to go through. Of course, a lot of my relatives are Republicans. They're not all Democrats, and I understand we have big conversations about that. So I think that through what are the things that are people concerned about? They're concerned about paying the bills. They're concerned about their kids getting an education. They're concerned about health issues, being able to afford to go to the doctor or having this health insurance. They're concerned about their kids not getting involved in drugs or bad things. They want safety issues in our community. You know, these are things, this isn't Republican or Democrat or Green Party or man off the moon party, you know. I mean, these are all concerns that we all have, and I think that the number one issue is to understand and empathize and sympathize with those issues, no matter what people, how they think they're going to get there. And I think even though I claim to be a Democrat, which I am, I've always been a Democrat, and I'm proud to be a Democrat, I also feel that this is a country made up of two parties at least. And if we don't get off the bucket here and start working with each other, we're in big trouble. And this is exactly what has happened. That Majority Coalition Caucus, Tim Sheldon claims this is bipartisan. Well, two Democrats among all the other Republicans? Is that really bipartisan?
Where's the place where you agree with the policies of either the Majority Caucus or the Republican Party? What are some issues where you
I
see?
think business, developing business, especially small business, I'm very interested in working with them and trying to develop more help for business. I do agree with that. However, I will not cross the line over giving corporations and huge vested interests and special interest groups in the state carte blanche so that they aren't paying their fair share and that the rest of us are suffering for it. I'm not interested in their super duper profit. I'm interested in what they're using our workers. Their facilities are here for the most part. They're using our goods, our services. They have all the advantages of being in this incredible state, Washington State. They need to pay their fair share. So that's where I part company with the Republicans, the Majority Coalition Caucus.
And what about your own party? Where is somewhere where you look at your own party and say, hey guys, we got to change our tune on this one to move things forward?
I think that we can't be too far to the left. You know, I think that sometimes they have a kind of a tunnel vision or a one-issue vision, you know.
What do you mean by that?
Or maybe someone just chooses the one particular thing, like I'm just interested in education, or I'm just interested in the environment, or I'm just interested in banking, or whatever, you know. It's sort of like in music. I'll use a musical analogy here. The kind of music that I enjoy playing the most is like a Bach fugue. A Bach fugue has many different voices. They all are equally important and strong, and they weave in and out of each other. Okay? That is the strength of a fugue. That's why I consider a fugue, or counterpoint, it's a musical term, as one of the greatest and most important discoveries or developments in music, in Western music. That's what I'd like to see in the state legislature. I'd like it to be an incredible fugue.
We have never had a fugue analogy. That's
I know it's weird,
Yeah,
but
no.
that's what leapt to my mind when I was
time.
thinking.
Different than the usual interview here. Did you have a question? Go
A
ahead.
couple, actually. One dealing with levies. You know, you're talking about funding to schools and everything, but yet Olympia has, over the last couple of years, kept increasing the amount of levies. You know, how would you be, you know, apt to start reducing that amount? In other words, instead, I think it's like 28% of a school budget, start reducing it back to something that makes a lot more sense for, at least for the taxpayers.
Mm-hmm.
And then how would you think the state would replace that funding? Because it's, again, part of the state's primary responsibility to pay for the education.
Right.
And right now, a good percentage of the levy funds goes for teacher salaries.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that wasn't originally what the levies were developed for, or, you know, this wasn't the original idea. This is what I mentioned earlier, is that because the system's pretty much broken, the revenue system, in my view, is broken, we're using all these little Band-Aids instead of really getting to the real illness. And so I think the state has to take a more proactive role in finding revenue, distributing it in a more even and fair way across the board, and not depending on the levies, because that's what's causing this terrible inequality between the schools in Issaquah and schools in Tacoma. So I agree with you. I think the levy system has become sort of a strange mutated beast that can be used to some school districts' great advantage, but it's not fair. It's not right.
Okay. And second one, you mentioned earlier in regards to the SKIA and why it's not being developed. Well, why do you think it's not being developed, and who should build the infrastructure in the SKIA?
I was talking to the director there a couple weeks ago, and he gave me he told me a very interesting story, is that there is one company there that repairs engines for planes. You know, after so many hours, I don't know how many they are, but after so many hours you have to have a rebuilt engine in your plane or you can't fly it. And so what's interesting is people are going down to Oregon, down to the airfields down there and the businesses, and leaving their planes down there and having them rebuilt, and then they fly them back up because it's only like an hour flight. And so the company that they have there that does this kind of work is really having a hard time. They're having a hard time, and why? Because of the way things are taxed here in Washington State. So that's something to investigate. Also, of course, 2008 hit, big problemo for developing business. Everyone is very scared. You know, that's a huge issue. But I don't know, I don't understand, I guess, why my opponent hasn't taken a really aggressive tack to try to develop SKIA. I think we're missing the boat on that, and if I get elected, that's exactly what I'm gonna
Well,
do.
who should be developing it? Is it a private property ownership? City of Bremerton has a lot of involvement there, a lot of private property owners, so.
I think
who
we
should
need to
be-
get everyone on the table, and we have to say, look, we're trying to develop this area, and this will, of course, be a great advantage not only to Kitsap County, but to Mason County, and consequently to the whole state. We need to everyone get to the table and work on that together. And I feel there's been too much, divisiveness. Everyone wants their little fair share. So if you can have some kind of leadership that will say, look, we need to do this. It's just sitting there. I mean, it's a bunch of tumbleweeds out there practically, you know? Let's do something with this. It's in our lap. Let's make use of this. So I don't have all the answers to that, but I'm gonna darn well find them.
You know, I always hear every time the legislature meets that we're gonna sit there and cut back on wasteful spending, but yet I never see any results of the cutbacks on wasteful spending. You know, because you can increase revenue or you can cut back on programs that either are not effective, wasteful spending. You mentioned one with all the stupid consultants we hired to tell us what to do, and then put the bridge where we wanted to put it to begin with anyway. This is one of my favorites. So what would you look for to save money and not spend money unwisely?
Yeah.
Programs that are maybe not effective or whatever.
Well,
Where
one
would you
thing
go?
I've noticed, being a small business person, watching other people's businesses, why they fail and why they also succeed, is bad management. People also want quick results. They're not interested in working on things step by step. They get into big trouble economically by spending things before they have it. So I think taking a conservative tact and doing things step by step and being very clear and have an outline, and also you have to get people behind you. I think it's a mistake for legislators to say we're going to do X, Y, and Z. They don't really explain it clearly to people. I mean, people are not stupid. You know, you can never talk down to people. They will understand. You just have to make it clear and take the time to communicate to people what you really want to do. I mean, on any given subject, even like the Belford bypass, you've got people, well, what is the Belford? I don't know what that is. What's that for? You know, I mean, unless people are really up on it, I mean, here are the people in this room, we're kind of active and are investigating, and of course you're related to the paper here, so, but the average person, they're busy. They're just trying to make a living and they're not thinking about all these things. So having, you know, very careful and clear communication with your constituents and saying, these are the options. What do you think about this? Are you willing to back this? If you're not willing to back it, what are some alternative plans? It's very easy to criticize things, but let's come up with some solutions. And I think a lot of politicians and a lot of just average people, you know, it's all negative, but they don't have any new ideas to come up with, you know, so let's try to change the psychology of this issue. It's like, yeah, we were hit hard in 2008. A lot of people are suffering. We have to get our act together now. We have to make some changes, and we have to be proactive about it.
What's the top thing you've heard the last couple months since you announced and you've been talking to people? Top concern that you say, I can handle that, I can take that.
I think the top concern that we're all facing is we're getting squeezed. The middle class is getting squeezed and people are worried. They're worried about being able to pay the bills and to keep their status quo. I've talked to retired folks, they're worried about their money and the rising taxes and rising expense of everything, rising, you know, food, and they're worried about Social Security, they're worried about Medicare, they're worried about, you know, is this gonna be here for me 10, 15 years when I'm like 85 or whatever. Kids are worried. They're saying, how am I ever gonna go to college? How am I ever gonna afford that? My own kids are telling me that, you know, saying, well, gee, Mom, we know, you know, Mom, Dad, we know you don't have a ton of money, you know. Kids are worried about it. Little kids are worried about it. We're worried about environmental issues. I mean, you hear on the news all the time about what's happening internationally. Right here in our own home turf, we've got the acidification that's going to affected, already is affecting our shellfish population out here, some of the industries that we depend on here in this area. So there are some issues, from littlest kids that I've talked to elderly people. I've talked to veterans. I don't understand why we have veterans living out in the woods. I don't understand why we've got homeless people begging on street corners, even in downtown Silverdale. I don't understand why our mental health programs are cut so severely. I went to Salvation Army about a month ago and talked to a lot of people there, and I mean, boy, people are doing things on a shoestring. I went to the North Mason Resource Center, which is like a one-stop place. I talked to the guy that works with the veterans. I talked to a man who's a psychologist. I talked to the food bank people. I mean, it's wonderful that communities are combining their resources and trying to help people that are less fortunate, but it's a complicated situation. So I think there are a lot of issues that we just have to say, look, you know, we don't have to be like this. Mason County doesn't have to have all these problems. Kitsap County doesn't have to. We don't have to be like this, but we have to choose legislators that are going to work their butts off, basically, and to try to change these things, and not for their own personal gain.
Well, we're just about at the end of the time. Give us one closing statement. Tell us how you're going to work your butt off, or
Great English, right?
if there's any issue we didn't get to touch here, this would be your chance to say here's something else. We'll take a minute and finish up.
Well, I think the bottom line when you do something is you have to be passionate about it. That's why I became a musician. A lot of people said, oh, you don't want to do that, you'll never make any money at it, and what is that, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, you know, I just have a calling for this. This is what I want to do. This is how I want to spend my time. And I've been very passionate in my teaching, trying to change people's lives through music, and through my influence, hopefully a good role model for these students. I've been passionate about being a mom and trying to raise my kids. I've been passionate about my husband, who I've been married to for 35 years, even though we get in arguments once in a while. But, you know, I think that's the bottom line. The bottom line is if you want to change things, if you want to do some good in the world, you have to really do it out of love. Pretty simple answer.
Well, thanks. We appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.